We've got one more professional handicapper guest to join us here today. That is Mr. Rolf Michaels from WagerTalk.com. Rolf, how's it going today, buddy? We'll see if we can get Rolf here on the show. Maybe having a little bit of an issue there on his end. Rolf, you there?
Adam, I am back. I apologize. I had my mute button on, and my silly fat cheek hit my phone. So sorry about that.
No, it's all good. Good to have you on the program here. And don't mute yourself again, because I know our listeners certainly want to hear what you have to say with regards to the big college football and the NFL cards here coming up this week. Rolf, I guess let's go ahead and dive right on into the games here. We got a few that we're going to talk about in college, a few in the NFL, and then I want to ask you at the end of the segment here today about college basketball preparations, your starting point, some of the tips that you have for our listeners out there. But let's start on Friday night. We got a game out in the Pac-12, little Pac-12 after dark action in Salt Lake City between UCLA and Utah. Pretty steady stream of Utah money here. This number opened 5. 5 Dimes is out there showing 7. A few other books showing 6.5. Not really a big surprise here to see this line move with Josh Rosen banged up, as he pretty much has been for the last year and a half.
Well, it's interesting this week because Josh Rosen hasn't practiced. And, Mora has said he's still a game-time decision, but obviously he's such a huge factor. I mean, Devin Monsters is back up, and, he just got into that game against Wisconsin. But with Rosen out, I think the only way to go is Utah. Now, if he makes a decision that Rosen will play, it's his non-throwing finger that was hurt. UCLA is in that position at 4-4 where they want to become bowl eligible, but Moore is also there to protect his quarterback, who's going to be a high draft choice. And when you get to this stage and you're not competing for the championship game, a lot of coaches will protect their stars, because that's the way to recruit more stars, is to make sure you have their best interest in mind. But with that being said, I mean, I could never back a UCLA squad that's allowing an incredible 307 yards per game rushing and 6.1 yards per carry. We know Utah wants to run the ball. If Utah has the capabilities to run the ball and you have no Josh Rosen for any backdoor potential, I think there's only one way to go, as Utah, is on their own 4-game losing streak. They're looking for a feel-good win as well.
I think this game is pretty tricky. And I look at my personal power and plays, and I've got it down in the 3.5, 4 range, because I don't know what Utah is at this point. They play a close game at home against Stanford. Now, they beat Arizona, but that was before Khalil Tate took over. Played the close game at home against Stanford. Had a shot to beat USC on the road, went for 2, didn't get it. But then the last 2 weeks, outscored 71-30 by Arizona State and Oregon. So this is very un-Kyle Whittingham-like when it comes to the Utes, is to see them have back-to-back really bad performances. So maybe the buy sign is on for Utah a little bit here. But I also think that as we're getting deeper into the season, as teams watch some film and have adjusted, I don't know if this new look Utah offense with the offensive coordinator from Eastern Washington, Taylor, I don't know if this is something that's fully working out for Utah at this point. And I just don't know what to do with them, to be completely honest with you.
Well, you have to remember, Tyler Huntley started the first 4 games when they went 4-0. He then got hurt. Troy Williams came in the Arizona game, and then Troy Williams started against Stanford and USC, both losses. He had a 2-3 combined ratio. Then you have Tyler Huntley come back against Arizona State, and he threw 4 picks. He had a 0-4 ratio. He was 19 of 35. So now all of a sudden he was horrible in his first start back. Last week against Oregon, in his second start back, he did have a 2-0 ratio. The defense just didn't do well enough in that situation. Darren Carrington had a big game with him. Carrington's had the wide receiver, the Oregon transfer, has had 4 games of over 100 yards. And with Huntley now making his third start back from an injury after missing 2.5 games, I think you see that offense starting to progress to where they thought it would be earlier in the year.
I think that's a really excellent point that you just made regarding Huntley, and not just the fact that he was injured and then came back, but that it takes a little bit of time generally. And this is an angle that I try to apply when it comes to baseball, that when there's a starting pitcher that comes off of injury, I will only look to fade him in that first game back. I won't back a team in that situation, and I probably need 2 or 3 starts before I know that a guy is back to commanding his pitches. And obviously you're not commanding the football necessarily the same way that you are pitches, but when it comes to playing the quarterback position, it's about timing. It's about, being able to read things. It's about being able to see what you need to see, to call out line protections, to do all that type of stuff. And sometimes that just doesn't come back as quickly, especially for a guy like Huntley, who was a first-time starter here at the top of the year. So I think it's a really excellent point that you make there, and I think that there are a lot of compelling betting angles for this game. And like I said, being a late Pac-12 game, I'm sure our listeners will have action on it. So let me ask you about this then, Rolf. The total of 59. And I know you got a fairly strong opinion here on the side. You ran down all the problems that UCLA has had defensively here so far. How well does Utah stack up against this UCLA offense?
Well, Utah's defense gave up 532 yards at USC and 416 against Oregon. But at home, they're a different team. They're allowing 100 fewer yards at home. They're allowing 308 yards per game compared to 407 on the road. Now, granted, they had an Arizona State team at home, a Stanford team at home, North Dakota and San Jose State. So the first two, obviously, very weak foes. The second are decent foes. In Stanford, they gave up 23 points, 384 yards. In Arizona State, they gave up 30 yards and 345 yards. I think UCLA's offense is, depending on how Bryce Love is going, I would put UCLA's offense with both of those teams. So I think you have an outlier here where, if Rosen plays, UCLA may get into the 30s. If they don't play, I expect them to be in the 20s. I think and maybe the 30 is a little high because UCLA hasn't topped 31 points their last 4 games. I would certainly lean with the under in this. And the situation is this. Utah wants to run the ball. I mean, they've been forced to throw the last few weeks. You can't look at their numbers the last 4 weeks because they've been trailing in every game. If they get the early lead here, this could be a live betting action where you wait to see what happens with Rosen. And a lot of times we see adjustments in the side, but not as big of adjustment in the total. If Utah gets out to an early lead, I would then look to automatically bet the under because with the lead, they will run the ball. If they get behind on a fluky play or Rosen drives them down, then Utah gets a little pressure and has to throw the ball, and that again slows the clock down. So because of the injury to Rosen, because of the uncertain situations, this is a great play where on Friday night you're doing live betting and you're taking advantage of whatever presents itself.
I think that's a really excellent point. And then one final point to make about this game here, and then we'll head on into Saturday. Third road game in 4 weeks for UCLA. And, of course, as we know about Salt Lake City, in the altitude. They were at Arizona on October 14th, hosted Oregon, at Washington last week up in Seattle, and then now taking on Utah. So situationally, the spot not really ideal here for the Bruins. Let's go to game 325, 326 in the ACC on Saturday, 3:30 kickoff between Clemson and North Carolina State. Clemson's a 7-point favorite here in this one, and there's a lot to unpack about this game. I mean, Clemson, with Kelly Bryant banged up, they haven't really been the same that we saw at the time. So, Rolf, how are you seeing this?
The interesting thing is that everyone remembers what NC State did last week against Notre Dame. In the scope of things, that game means nothing. NC State leads their division. They are 4-0 in the ACC. Clemson is 3-1. This game is for first place. And Clemson actually has the pressure in this game because Clemson needs to win the division. Obviously, if Clemson beats them, they'll have a game edge. I like the home dog in this. NC State 6-1 is a home dog of 6 or more. Ryan Finley did throw his first interception, but he's got a 12-1 ratio. Naheem Hines is their top running back. He's number 4 in the country in all-purpose yards. He has 654 yards, 5.5 yards per carry. They'll need him against Clemson's D. But as you said, with Bryant banged up, it doesn't give him the same type of mobile ability that Bryant had earlier. Bryant has 460 yards rushing on the year, but in the last couple games, they haven't wanted to rush him. This is also a road game. You look at what they've done on the road. They went to Louisville and they put up 613 yards. We know how bad Louisville's defense is. They go to Virginia Tech. They were outgained at Virginia Tech. They only put up 332 yards, and they were outgained by 10 yards in that game. And then they go to Syracuse, Bryant gets hurt and they lose. So this NC State defense is every bit as good as Virginia Tech. And if you're going to have Clemson only in the 300-yard range, you clearly have a defensive home dog that's ahead of a team in the standings that last year took them to the final minute and missed a chip shot, or else they would have beat them, and knocked them out of their perch. So a very live dog for me with the Wolfpack.
I like what you brought up about pressure, and this is something that becomes a thing here in the month of November. Of course, we had the first edition of the college football playoff rankings come out on Tuesday, and for Clemson, by and large, that loss to Syracuse doesn't really mean a whole lot for them. If they win out, run the table, beat a bowl-eligible South Carolina team, at least the South Carolina team that it's not great necessarily, but it's still a fairly decent team and has a decent record. Of course, they are an SEC team. So, Clemson goes through, runs the table in the regular season, goes on in and beats Miami or Virginia Tech, whoever they wind up playing the ACC title game. They're going to be in the college football playoff again, and they get that kind of respect based on what they've done in the national landscape over the last couple of years. So for them, not just is this game about the ACC, but it's also about that college football playoff dream. For NC State, they were a dark horse to get in there. If they would have run the table, beating Clemson, beating Boston College and Wake Forest, winning the ACC title game, then they would have maybe had a chance to get there. They don't have to worry about it because they lost that game to Notre Dame, and they needed that one for their resume. So, like you said, now NC State, it's all about the conference, whereas for Clemson, it's all about the much bigger picture, and that can be detrimental for a team.
It can, and it also, as you said, it's a different perspective when you have a team on the road just looking to win. Let's be honest. If you're the national champion and the next season you have one loss, you are making the playoffs. I don't care if you lose to Syracuse once and then win every other game by 1 point the rest of the year as a double-digit favorite. It doesn't matter. If you're the returning national champion, you win your conference, and you have one loss, you're making it back to the big show. And that's the difference. You see them starting to play tighter in the fourth quarter, while NC State, again, you've got to remember this NC State rush defense was number 5 in the country prior to last week against Notre Dame. And again, granted, they got shelled on the road. They gave up 318 yards and 5.9 yards per carry. They lost 2 defensive linemen during that game that were not playing in the second half. They will both be available. I just went and checked this morning. Doran said he expects them both back to play, so they're back to where they were prior to that game. And, again, this is a great situation when you get into November and you've got a team that has total confidence playing at home. This is NC State's only home game in a 5-game stretch. They were at Pittsburgh, at Notre Dame. They have at Boston College and at Wake Forest coming up. So your only November home game for your fans, the biggest game you have circled. Again, I think it's a situation where a very live defensive home dog comes into play.
Well, let's move down the card here a little bit. And this is one of these really interesting games that we talk about. We kind of hit on a couple of these last week, and we'll hit on one here this week as well. Game 377-378 between Western Kentucky and Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's pretty much a double-digit favorite across the board. There are some 9.5s out there with them at home. This is something of a rivalry game because Western Kentucky in Bowling Green, Vanderbilt in Nashville. These two teams do tend to play each other during the regular season. And this is such a weird spot for Vanderbilt because it comes right in the middle of SEC play. Now, they need this game. They've dropped 5 straight. They've gotten blown out in 4 of them. And then last week against South Carolina, Vanderbilt outgained the Gamecocks 440-386, lost the game 34-27, even though Kyle Shermer threw for 333 yards. So you would think the buy sign would be on for Vanderbilt, yet this number is coming down from 11.5 to 10 or 9.5.
I can tell you that I was with Brad at the Win on Sunday, and this was my top play of the week. I am absolutely all over Vanderbilt, and it very well be my top play for my customers. Derek Mason is 6-0 against the USA foes. When they can win and beat teams, they're a good bully. They already went to Middle Tennessee with Stockstill and beat them. They are 3-5. Your 5 losses at home against Bama, at home against Georgia, Oh, by the way, the number 1 and 2 teams in the college football poll. On the road, Florida, Mississippi, South Carolina. 80% of the teams in the country are going to lose those games. Now you have Western Kentucky, which will give you your 4th win. Then you have Kentucky, Missouri, and Tennessee. Bowl eligibility is just sitting in front of you. No questions you're keeping your kids motivated. On the flip side, while Western Kentucky is the CUSA back-to-back conference champion and is 5-2 this year straight up, they're 1-6-1 against the spread. Their wins came against Eastern Kentucky, a 2-6 Ball State team, an 0-8 UTEP team, a 1-7 Charlotte team, and a 2-6 Old Dominion team. And oh yeah, by the way, my top play last week was Florida Atlantic. Florida Atlantic went to Western Kentucky and was laying 6.5. Now Western Kentucky is getting 9.5 or 10 on the road at an SEC foe. I don't get it.
No, I don't get it either. And this is one of those spots, typically I look at Vanderbilt, and I've talked about this before on the show, that they by and large have no home field advantage because when they play somebody, people want to go to Nashville. The fans of that program that's coming to town are going to show up to Nashville. They're going to frequent the bars. They're going to go down to the stadium. When I went to the South Carolina game last year, it was probably about 55-45 South Carolina fans, maybe 60-40, all of them down on Broadway before and after the game. Massive South Carolina tailgates all around the stadium. It's just the nature of the beast when you play in a tourist destination like Nashville. This, on the other hand, though, Western Kentucky's not going to have a big traveling party for this game. If people want to go to Nashville, they're going to do it in the summer. They're going to do it whenever they want to because it's not a big trip for them. So this is one of those spots where Vanderbilt may actually have a little bit of a home field advantage. So I think we'll also walk into a situation like you talked about where Vanderbilt needs 3 of the last 4. It's set up for them with what's going on with Tennessee, with Kentucky being a mediocre middle-of-the-road team. And also here, I mean, look, when you get your ass kicked by Alabama, that's going to happen. When you lose to Florida on the road, that's going to happen. When you lose to Georgia at home, Georgia's a very good team like you mentioned. The last 2 games here, at least offensively, they've gotten it going. And now you want a situation where they've got an inferior team that they're playing, and I think you're on the right track with this one.
And you have to remember that, Lane Kiffin's new offense down at Florida Atlantic, they run those guys up, and they're running plays every 10 to 11 seconds. Last week they had 80-some plays against Western Kentucky. That's tough to do. Going on the road, being on the field for that long for your defense, getting run over. I mean, they gave up 360 yards rushing and 6.7 yards per carry. And now you got offensive linemen that are bigger and stronger and built better. And while Ralph Webb's only averaging 3.8 yards per carry, Shermer has an 18-3 ratio. If you're on any other team and you have an 18-3 ratio, people are going to talk about you because it's Vanderbilt. I mean, that shows how well you're playing. When you're a dog in all those SEC games and you're getting outgained and you're playing better competition, but you still have an 18-3 ratio, hats off to you.
No, I completely agree. And that's something I totally missed about Kyle Shermer, and especially because Vanderbilt's passing attack over the last several years has just not been very good, to say the least. Let's go out to the Big 12 here. Game 381-382 between Texas and TCU. TCU, a touchdown favorite here in this one. I think that this is a tricky spot coming off of your first loss, even though you were the better team in that game. Oklahoma on the road on deck. Texas is so Jekyll and Hyde. You don't really know what you're going to get. You don't know who's going to play quarterback for them. I think TCU's in a difficult situation here.
Well, there's one stat in this game that you have to be aware of, and it is that Tom Herman, going back to his days at Ohio State as the OC, going to Houston as the head coach, and going to Texas as the head coach, he's 14-0 ATS with 11 straight upsets as an underdog. You have a defensive team that is in every game as a dog, and for me, it's the only way to play the game. I will, again, there's a lot of times I'm not worried about playing against a 14-0 streak, especially when you're the OC, but that translates into 7-0 as a head coach as a dog. Now you're in a position where earlier in the year, you might have played both quarterbacks because Erlinger and Buechele both stunk. But now, you have Erlanger banged up. Buechele comes in against Baylor, leads them to 427 yards, has a great game, 256 yards passing, and you're going to a TCU squad that is off a loss. Is it their bubble burst? Well, maybe, maybe not. We don't know that yet, but it's certainly a horrible game. You only outgained Iowa State by 52 yards. When you played West Virginia at home, you got outgained by 102 yards. When you played Oklahoma State, you got outgained by 33 yards. So the defense we're used to seeing from TCU, although they held Kansas to 21 yards, that certainly sways your defense. I mean, when you look at TCU on the whole, you really have to take out those outlier games. When you allow 66 yards to Jackson State and 21 yards to Kansas, any defense is going to look a lot better than they really are. So, by taking out those games, by looking at what Texas has done on the road, you've got a coach that certainly knows how to motivate your team. You got a game that's going to be lower scoring. You're getting a touchdown. I clearly like the Texas side on this.
Well, and one of the angles that I've been looking at here throughout the week is that you have some games out here in the marketplace where you've got some really good defenses that are playing high-octane offenses that they haven't really faced. Well, in this case for TCU, they've got a pretty good offense, but they have not faced a defense of Texas's caliber here at any point throughout this season. Oklahoma State's defense is okay. West Virginia's defense is okay. But Texas's defense has athleticism, is physical, is big, can play. I mean, this is a team that, with the double overtime with USC, took Oklahoma State down to the wire, took Oklahoma to the wire. Those are three pretty good offenses that they've faced that they've had success against. So that's the question I have here. And the thing that you alluded to is that, what does TCU do against this defense? And on the surface, it doesn't look like it's enough to cover a touchdown.
It doesn't. Kenny Hill has a 15-5 ratio, and he's throwing for a lot. A lot of that is the offense they're doing. But again, you look at the situation. They had 542 yards against Jackson State, 619 yards against SMU. The only other games that they had over 406 yards was at Oklahoma State because they ran 88 plays because Oklahoma State ran at such pace. And they had 475 yards against Kansas. Well, I mean, a MAC team can have 475 yards against Kansas. So 307 against Iowa State, 395 against Kansas State, 361 against Arkansas, 406 against West Virginia. I completely agree. You now have extreme pressure. Texas doesn't have pressure. Tom Herman's in his first year. People are now seeing how competitive they were against Oklahoma, how competitive they were against USC, how competitive they were against Oklahoma State. Granted, they may be disappointed that they didn't win any of those games, but you know what? You win those games that you can at Baylor. You're now 4-4. You got TCU, Kansas, West Virginia, and Texas Tech. It certainly seems the ship has been righted. For the first time, you have two quarterbacks, both of which have given you wins and have had success. So you're in a great position picking who you want to play. And again, all the pressure on this game is on TCU, who knows the only way for them to continue moving forward into the playoffs is to not only win, but to win handily and win convincingly. And when you have to win big, let alone win, it certainly adds another level of the steam cooker.
No, you're absolutely right there, and I think you're definitely on the right track with this handicap as well. You mentioned TCU with 475 yards against Kansas. Saying could do that. Central Michigan had 590 yards against Kansas earlier this year. Ohio had 450. So, yeah, that certainly does appear to be the case here. I do want to throw one curveball at you here because I had a listener question about this game, and I forgot about it until now. So I'll talk a little bit here so you can organize your thoughts and notes if you want. But game 359-360 between Charlotte and Old Dominion. You mentioned Charlotte already and their record and how they're having not a down year. It's kind of the types of years that Charlotte has been having since they transitioned over to FBS. Old Dominion laying 7.5 or 8 here in this one.
Well, this is one of my favorite plays against. When you have a team, when you have a team that's not used to being favored and now all of a sudden is thrown into the favorites role, I love playing against those teams. Last week Charlotte was a 9-point dog to UAB. UAB again, first year back, not expected to be that big of a favorite in the role. Charlotte pulls the upset. I went through this game and I went through it pretty significantly. I was against Old Dominion last week on the road at North Texas. Stephen Williams had an 0.9 ratio his last 5 games. But they did enough to just survive. I mean, they had 386 yards. They had a couple short touchdowns against North Texas. But I certainly cannot back a favorite that has lost the turnover battle in every game this year, or they've been tied. In their last 5 games, they're -9 turnovers. They were -2 against FAU, -2 against Marshall, -2 against Western Kentucky, -1 against North Texas. On the flip side, Charlotte has either been even or plus turnovers in each of the last 4 games. What did they do? They went to FIU. They outgained them. They only lost by 1. FIU, we find out now under Davis, is a 5-2 team. Granted, they haven't beaten many people, but you get 5 wins. It's still to be noted. You play Marshall at home. You only lose by 11. You did go to Western Kentucky, and you did get rolled in that game. Western Kentucky threw for 500 yards. And then you beat UAB. To me, it's clearly the dog in this against a favorite that has now lost 6 straight games, against a favorite that has allowed 500 or more yards 3 times in that 6-game stretch, against a favorite that turns over the ball. One-sided for me, and I'll take the 49ers.
All right, we'll move over to the NFL side of things here, and had a listener request about this game. We were going to talk about it anyway, but it certainly is a very interesting game to say the least. And I think you caught the tail end of the segment there with Brad when I was talking about how Jacksonville's taken on some money here this week and the fact that bye-week teams have been steamed with regularity. Game 453, 454 between the Rams and Giants, with the Rams as a 3.5-point favorite at the Meadowlands. Both of these teams coming off of the bye here this week. So, Rolf, how are you breaking this game down?
I am there's times when, in the NFL, from top to bottom, these teams are so close. I say it often, and basically, when you're looking at the NFL, there's so much parity in the league that I compare it to the SEC West from top to bottom. You're going to have your Alabamas, you're going to have your good teams, and then you're going to have some bad teams, but anyone can beat anyone in any given day. I think the Rams right now are playing as well as anyone. I think that if you look at their offense, with Goff, 9-4 ratio, but 60%. You got Gurley rushing for a significant number of yards, but you've got a defense that under Wade Phillips is just playing great. The road team is 6-0 in Giants games this year. The Giants are just decimated with their receiving squad and with their offensive line. I think it's season we're just going to see it get away. The Giants right now only 1 win on the year. The Rams coming off the London shutout. And this is a game where, Sean McVay, the Rams head coach, used to be the Washington Redskins offensive coordinator. If you ever are going to kick a team in the teeth, there's times where you get up on a team and you may not try to, if you're a division foe or you play this team often, you may not try to run up that score. If you're a Washington Redskins ex-OC, you only play this team once every 4 years, unless if you finish in the same spot in the schedule. You want to kick him in the teeth. Same with Wade Phillips. Wade Phillips, he hates the Giants as well. If he's got a situation to blitz Eli Manning and knock him out, you can be damn sure he's going to. So I think the coaches add a different perspective to this as well. And I guess the Rams passed the eye test. The Giants are the complete opposite. So sometimes it's that simple. When they're lining up and you're that good and you're that much better than other teams, the Rams 2 losses this year at home against Washington, game 2. That's going to happen. And then Seattle. The Seattle game, they had a 134-yard edge, and they were -3 turnovers. And in the Washington game, they were -2 turnovers. So the only 2 games they've lost, They're -5 turnovers. They've won every other game. To me, I'm not going to overanalyze it. The Giants are a season that's sinking. The Rams are an up-and-coming team with exciting young head coach and an old grizzled DC veteran, and I'm going to take the Rams.
I like it. That's the way I'm looking with this game here, too. And also, you run into a situation here, and you mentioned the -5 turnover margin for the Rams. Giants have only forced 7 turnovers here in 7 games. But what does the bye week help the Giants? I mean, their injury situation is no better at wide receiver than it was prior to the bye. You've got friction between Ben McAdoo and the players. You've got what appears to be a lame duck head coach. The Giants are probably going to be, making a change here after the season, if McAdoo even makes it that long. You've got a decent interim there in defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo if you wanted to go that route. What does the bye week do for the Giants? I mean, I don't think it does anything for them. Are the players going to be invested in what is largely a lost season? I don't think so. So whereas the Rams, you've got Jared Goff, a young quarterback, a guy that can keep working things into the equation. You've got a first-year head coach in Sean McVay, where obviously things are working out. That's a team that's engaged during the bye. They take their break. They take their downtime off the London game. They're happy with that. They get back to practice ready to go. They want to keep playing. The Giants get back to practice, and they're like, damn it, we got to play again. So I think you've got two very different mindsets with the bye week as well.
I agree. And, it's not as if, though, the players sit home and read the newspaper and watch what the local media says, but they have no way to get around that. You're in New York City. You're a one-win team. People thought you were going to win the division. You are getting just lambasted in New York. Complete opposite. No one talks about you in LA. Everyone's talking about the Dodgers, but you're still not having any negative press. And that can just be draining on a team. I mean, especially, when you're in New York, Philadelphia, Boston, those areas that we always hear, especially with baseball, those are the toughest places to play because the fans are on you, the media is on you. You're just taking it from all sides. And again, these Giants teams were expected to be good. It's one thing if you're a horrible team and you're having a bad season. It's a completely other thing when there were four teams in your division. People were picking all 4 to win preseason, and now you have one win 8 games later.
Completely agree. I think you're on the right track with that one there as well. And let's go to the NFC South here. Let's talk Atlanta and Carolina. And it's a pretty interesting one for me. I mean, Atlanta's a team that I've been watching pretty closely. I had the Jets in the Super Contest last week. They've failed to cover by a half point, and I'll talk all about that game tomorrow on our Super Contest segment with Sports Cheetah. But Carolina took on some money against Tampa Bay. They were a very popular side. Neither team played particularly well in that game, but Carolina did come away with the win. This number is all over the place in the market. Pinnacle's at pick. Greek and BetOnline are at 1.5. DSI's at 2.5. Couple of ones out there as well. But the fact remains this number is between Pick'em and 3. So, I think it's kind of interesting to see the spreads here based on what certain sports books need. What are you looking at in this game, if anything?
Well, the first thing I want to bring up is that we have a unique situation with the Falcons on a third straight road game. I did look that up, and a quick note here for those of you that may not be familiar with Killer Sports. Ed Meyer, as a PhD, he's a college professor. He's put together a great website. It's killersports.com, and there's a lot of great angles, and he's got a query where you can ask it almost anything once you learn the language. But in the NFL, there's a query box where it's an easy pull-down set, and you can find out situations. So I went back to look in the last 5 years how teams do off 3 straight road games. And it's happened 22 times in the last 5 years. They're 9-3 straight up. They're 11-11 against the spread, and they're 12-9-1 over under. So while I'm not sharing anything enlightening to you, at least the listeners know that it's pretty much have been a non-factor on a third straight road game at 11-11 ATS, instead of making it like, oh my God, they're on a third straight road game, I want to play against them. Now, to me, it's defense. Cam Newton is an enigma. With a 10-11 ratio this year, that's just mind-boggling to me. But you look at Matt Ryan, he's got a 9-6 ratio. Carolina got Kuechly back last week, and even without him, their defense has held 5 of their 8 opponents to a season low in yardage, and 2 of those opponents were held to a second low, the second lowest total they've gotten all year. You know, when you're looking at a season low, and then I look at what the Falcons have done, you know, the Falcons offense the last 4 weeks, you're at home against Buffalo, you score 17. Is Carolina's defense as good as Buffalo's? I have them in the same range. You scored 17 points against Miami with 339 yards gained. Clearly, Carolina's better than Miami's defense. You went to New England. You only put up 343 yards and 7 points. Carolina's defense far better. And then you look at the Jets. They went into New York. They put up 386 yards and 25 points against the Jets. Carolina far better. So to me, with both offenses struggling, I'm clearly going to take a defense that, again, has held their last 2 opponents and 3 of their last 4 to a season low, 279 yards to Tampa Bay. We know what they did to Chicago in the loss, giving up 2 defensive touchdowns, 153 yards and 5 first downs, 242 yards at Detroit. We saw Detroit put up 500 yards against Pittsburgh just this past primetime game, and then 310 yards to Philly with 15 first downs. I love defense, and if I could get a defense with a team that I'm going to lay under a touchdown, even with a quarterback with a negative ratio, in a division game where you can knock out a foe and make sure that they're going to have their 4th loss in 5 games, to me it points to the Panthers.
That's really interesting. I like all the stats that you brought up there, and it kind of talks me off of a little bit of a lean on the Atlanta side, because one of the things I was looking at here this week is Cam Newton's had some problems with Ron Rivera. He's had some problems with the organization as a whole this year. Seemed like those things kind of got set aside a little bit once he felt comfortable with the shoulder, started playing at a higher level, and then the last couple of weeks has regressed again. But he was very unhappy with the Kelvin Benjamin trade. And, you know, it was one of those things where some of the media reports were kind of that, you know, well, sometimes the quarterback gets asked about these things, but Cam Newton didn't get asked about it. And you have to assume that that's something that didn't really sit particularly well with him. So I was kind of thinking about maybe looking to fade the Panthers as a Cam Newton fade, thinking that maybe, you know, there's a little bit of friction there. Maybe he's a little bit upset with some of the decisions that have been made. But like you just mentioned, you know, this Carolina defense has played really well throughout the year. So just a different angle for our listeners to consider regarding that Benjamin trade. But I think the statistics hold up more than a narrative that I'm just coming up with.
I have an off-topic subject, Adam, and it's close and dear to our hearts. Talking about trades, obviously, you know, for those that didn't hear, the Browns were wanting to trade for a quarterback, and the trade didn't go through because they were 5 minutes late calling the NFL office in the trade deadline. But it came to my mind. I was actually with Preston. We were shooting videos yesterday, and we were having lunch after videos. And I said, how much does it show you how much teams disrespect the Browns if a division foe is going to trade you a quarterback that's going to play against you twice a year for the next couple of years? And Pittsburgh traded him a wide receiver. That just shows that the teams in your division have absolutely no respect for you. I don't know when the last time there was a division trade of a quarterback in the NFL. You know, and so it just shows how far the Browns have fallen, where Cincinnati, your rival, is going to trade you a quarterback that's going to play against you. So that's just my vent for the day.
You know, and what's really interesting about that trade is that, you know, if you're the Browns and you've had a top 3 pick in each of the last several years, and you're going to have a top 3 pick here again this year, and you go this analytics route, and I love it. I think it was very smart of them to try to go something different. Paul DePodesta did such a good job with the Moneyball era that, you know, maybe he's trying to incorporate some of those things to football. I get it. I talk about it all the time with college teams. If you're a bad college team, try an option, try an air raid, try something different. Do something different, because being mediocre or worse every year doesn't help anybody. So I like that the Browns did that. But then you look at the way that they've handled the drafts, you look at the way that they've handled all their personnel moves, and all of a sudden they come to the conclusion of A.J. McCarron. Like, what the hell? I don't know what's going on in Berea. I don't know what's going on down at First Energy Stadium, but it's not a good look everywhere you turn for that team.
And the Browns were going to give up a second and the third for McCarron when the day prior even if the trade goes through, we would have overpaid relative to the market what happened the day prior. So, jobs open in the Browns front office. Make sure you're not qualified and please apply.
Yeah, right. All right, one more game I want to look at here for the NFL real quickly is Oakland and Miami. This is a Sunday night football game here. Oakland back out on the road again after playing in Buffalo last week, but the market, undeterred by that, they want to take Oakland this week. Up from 2.5 to 3 with extra juice. Jay Cutler supposedly back for the Dolphins here this week. I don't know if it matters if they use Jay Cutler, Matt Moore, Michael Moore. I don't think it matters who they put at quarterback the way this offense is going. Now, this is one of those situations. I talked about the Kelvin Benjamin trade in Carolina. The Jay Ajayi trade in Miami, Adam Gase put his foot down, and I don't know if he put it down in the right spot.
When you trade away your running back, and I don't think the second running back on the team has over 100 yards this year. So obviously you're going to say, well, we feel very comfortable with our quarterbacks. Well, let's see what Matt Moore did and what Jay Cutler did. I completely agree. I don't understand either trade, Benjamin or Miami. So I'm sort of just speechless. To me, it says this season is now done. Although you look at Miami, I mean, they're still 4-3 on the year. And I am looking at a team that in Oakland has lost 5 of 6. And if you said to me, without even knowing the records, oh my God, to me it's Oakland or nothing, but the records are reversed. So again, this is a game where I don't understand it, and it's I don't understand the Miami situation. They had, when you have 225 yards against the Jets, 186 against the Saints, 178 against Tennessee, 289 against Atlanta, 196 for Baltimore. Your season high on the year is 357 yards. You've only scored over 20 points once. That was against the Jets. And, oh, yeah, by the way, that's the one game where your quarterback gets hurt and you need a backup quarterback in the second half and you win the game. So I cannot bet on Miami. Again, I am not a big fan of the Raiders either, having lost 5 of 6. They'd be on an 0-6 run if they didn't come back against Kansas City. You have back-to-back road games. You were at Buffalo last week. You did outgain them, but you were minus 4 turnovers. Now you're traveling again. You're the only NFL team in the last 50 years or since 1950 to not have an interception your first 7 games of the year. This is a game where I certainly would not want to bet on either team.
No, I don't blame you for that. And I'm curious to see where this number goes. If we get to 3.5, if it starts coming back down to 3 flat, something like that, should be a very interesting one to watch as we go here closer to kickoff on Sunday night. Of course, we will see a lot of public action on it because it's a Sunday night game and they're going to play it no matter what. So I have to think Oakland's probably the preferred public side there in that one, and we'll see if we get some sharp money to balance this thing out a little bit. But, Rolf, in 8 days, college basketball starts. I know you're a huge college basketball guy. I know as of last week you hadn't done too much work with it. I don't know how much you've gotten done here to this point, but just tell our listeners, what your approach is, how you start to plan for the season.
Adam, if I could just jump back to the NFL for 1 second. Again, when I was listening to you and Brad, you guys were talking about the outlier of a team off a 30-point win playing against that team. And this is just something else I looked up while you guys were out. I believe you were talking about the Baltimore-Tennessee game, Baltimore off a 30-point win. Well, if you are an NFL team and your opponent is off a 30-point win, you're 10-14 against the spread. This goes back the last 5 years. You're 13-11 against the spread, and the total is 16-7-1 to the over/under. So, again, just to answer some of the questions when we're talking about what happens in these outlier situations, that holds true for the Giants and the Rams this week, as well as the Titans and the Ravens. So, again, not something that you're going to base a bet on, but at least when our viewers are listening to, those outliers and we talk about playing against them, they know the numbers behind them. Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. All right, so your college basketball preparations, how's that going? What do you do to get ready for the season?
Well, basically what I do is, I have my ending numbers from last year, and I just start going through a conference at a time, and I don't get done, to be honest with you, by the time the season starts. In college football, in the NFL, and baseball, and the NBA, all your preseason work is done prior to the first game being played. Well, in college basketball with 352 teams, with baseball just ending, with the NBA just starting, with college football and the NFL, I basically do a conference. I try doing a conference every couple of days, and then what happens is when we get the tip-off next week on November, I think it's Friday, November the 11th, I then start looking at those game-by-game situations, and when teams are playing, I get caught up on those teams that day. So it takes me about a week and a half into the season to be done with my preseason prep. Not the greatest situation in the world, but, as games are being played, it's easy to get caught up on one team. Go back, read their summer reading, read the injuries that occurred, look at their final power ratings, look how many starters are back. And the important thing to me is to take a 3-year look at a team. I like looking at what a team has had back each of those 3 years. So if you have 2 starters back from a team that won 20 games 3 years ago, 2 starters back from a team that won 19 games a year ago, 2 starters back from a team that won 18 games, 1 year ago, you then have a gauge to know that team, what position they're going to be in. When you have those huge outliers and you have a team that won 9 games and the next year they won 20 games, well, is that because they had 0 starters back when they won 9 games and then they had 5 starters back when they won 20? So each team is individual, but I take a 3-year gauge of each team, how many starters are back, have the coaches changed, have the methods changed, look at what those teams have done against the spread and over-under, and I come up with my opening power ratings on those teams conference by conference as I go. And then, again, as the season progresses, those conferences that I didn't finish, I then get caught up during that first week and start looking. We mentioned before, Blue Ribbon is an excellent source, but also, go to the school sites. The schools are putting out the media guides on the college teams, and there's a lot of fluff in media guides. But if you're reading the quick facts and knowing who's back, if you're looking at the starters that are injured, that is the most vital information you have. Don't be fooled by saying a team has 5 starters back when 2 of them aren't going to start the season because they're banged up and they're not going to play, and one of those is your point guard. It changes the complete perspective of the team. So, if I give our customers one note of importance, it's that if a team has 4 or 5 starters back with their point guard, it's an almost automatic play for me as long as the numbers are within 3 or 4 points of where my power ratings are in November. Times change, kids grow up quick. You play those November tournament games. Conference games start in December now. But when you have a team with a legitimate starting point guard returning, it is the absolute necessity to make sure you're looking on that team and if there's value to bet on them. And very rarely in the first 2 weeks of basketball will I ever play against a team where the opposite team has a point guard back and I don't have a point guard back.
Well, Ralph Michaels from WagerTalk.com. We'll get more into that college basketball stuff as the season goes along here. And then, of course, after bowl season wraps up and we hit the first of the year and then on after that. But what's going on over at WagerTalk.com right now?
You know what? I have a special available right now. Normally, we don't talk about our late phones very much, but, I'm off to a good start in the NBA, college football, and NFL. NFL is doing fantastic, 75% over the last 5 weeks. If you go to WagerTalk.com, go to the Cappers page and look for Cal Sports. I have 2 weeks of complete service, football and basketball, for $99. Normal price is 1 week for $99. You're getting 2 for $99 if you're interested. Gridiron Guide is a weekly college football newsletter that has the entire logs, yardage, turnovers, ATS, and over-under categories. And probably next week, by the time we talk, it'll be right before the start of college basketball. I'll have a mini guide available, so you'll be able to know how many wins the teams have had each of the last couple of years, what their RPI rankings were when they started and when they finished the season, and how many starters they have back. So it'll be a cheat sheet that everyone will have if you're going to handicap college hoops.
Well, of course, you can follow Rolf on Twitter at CalSportsLV. Rolf Michaels, WagerTalk.com. Thank you so much for your time, man. We appreciate it. I'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks, bud. Appreciate it.